Yeah,
What's the biggest challenge? I would think probably the biggest thing would just be starting over again, getting to know other dancers. Because in London, you have access to like other dancers to like run things by, to be like, oh, can we try out some of this material together, stuff like that. And then like you're up in Scotland or by yourself, and you know,
hmm
like I end up the reality is like when you're starting out, you end up creating a lot of solos because like you always have your own body to work on. But
mm.
like I hate working on solos. Um, but
Oh,
just
mate.
practically speaking, it's so much easier to create lots of work with by creating solos. But yeah, I would so much rather work with other people or work on other
Oh
bodies.
yeah, yeah. It's it definitely feels like a lonely process, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really hard, and I really admire people who can do that because I know, um, I remember a while ago I went to see Jose Aguido's Silk Road a
Oh,
couple of years
dope.
back at the place, and and I remember in the Q&A like talking about I can't remember someone who he danced with in Akram Khan what kind
Yeah.
of the other dance uh people in the senior position which he danced with. I don't know if he took as rehearsal. I forget his name, but he talked about Jose as like he could do like 7 hours of just like do and doesn't need anyone. Just like that mental fortitude is
Mhm.
incredible to train yourself to do that. Like I really struggle with doing that. Like I can do like a bit of time by myself, like give me 2 hours max, and I'm just like I'm good. Like in a studio day, and then but yeah, I think is as well. If I don't have any of that kind of external stimulus, I get kind of bored quite easily as well. Like
Right.
um, I like to kind of have like things coming externally as well to like kind of yeah stimulate. I definitely like working with others, and that's kind of my what I do. I'm very collaborative in nature, so I do like work with a lot of people. In terms of like, I've got a long-term collaborator who have been working for like 2 3 years now, and on projects. And then I'm starting a new collaboration, and I'm involved in this exchange program with over this time in Scotland, I'm getting to know an organization called the Work Room, which I wasn't very um I need to find out actually when they started because I don't remember them being around, or they were kind of starting out or just not in my hemisphere as a student in Scotland when I was training in
Yeah.
Scotland before I went to London. And um they're called the Workroom, and we're currently doing. I was actually. It's amazing to even say it during this time that I was in another country. That was really cool. I've not been in another country for like what feels like 6 7 years. I don't really get to even before COVID. So it was a real pleasure. Went out to Munich.
Oh, cool.
Yes, which is good because it's all kind of locking down at the moment. So I was really lucky to get in when we did.
Yeah.
And and um we're like on this exchange project at the moment. They're going to come to us in Glasgow in May, so it's kind of like a research exchange. It's not really like we get together and create something, which where we can, but it's purely about research and exchange. So
Oh,
that's
that's great.
been really cool. So yeah, collaboration's my nature. Like I just that's definitely one of the things
And
I've
doing those things, you realize how even within something like contemporary dance, how like country to country people think about it very, very differently.
oh yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah, that
Mm.
their whole thinking, their whole process, approach to choreography and the way that they think about dance can be like just very different, different angle, different emphasis. And you only really realize that when you start like working with other dancers and you're like, oh, okay, this is bringing like a really different kind of often energy, actually a different kind of energy to the table.
Yeah, I know in Munich, for instance, there's a lot of like funding available for individuals so they can really
Oh,
just
good.
freely like experiment. And I think that's coming from the UK, like it's just like I feel like that can be very um limiting because
Hmm.
we don't necessarily always have access to that, or not every artist does. And it's
Yeah, because we
kind
kind
of
of have
like
like arts
limits you, and you
council, but
have
that's
to
really
kind
kind
of
of
be
it.
very methodical about how you're going things, because you've got to think about budget, you've got to think about this. I mean,
Yeah.
they've still got to do that. It's not like a limited well, but it's like, it's that thing of um there's less financial stress, and you can really just explore. And um because I think what they do, and correct me, any of my German friends, is that it's they get like they spoke about one funny. I don't know if it applies to all, but there was one person, like, you get they got like 3 years worth of funding to really get into their process and who they are,
Hmm.
and to really understand and how that's going to take them forwards. And they've got kind of these 3 years to do that,
Wow.
which is quite effective amount of time. And I would like to think that as someone with like kind of understand what their process is, or like at
Mm.
least on the path to you know how that then grows past that point after 3 years, and it's a
Yeah.
nice healthy amount of time.
Meanwhile, in the
And
UK, we get 2 weeks of funding and we like hold a party. We're popping confetti.
£100 a day,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
we have to figure out what's going to happen after those 2 weeks after.
Yeah,
Because it's
exactly.
like, if you got nothing lined up, you're like,
And
nope.
somehow show real artistic progress in those 2 weeks.
Oh man, do you not find when you're trying to start a new project and there's a lot of applications, like, because that's all my life is right now. I'm writing creative funding applications for Scotland to kind of continue the project we've been doing currently.
It's one of the most undersold, under talked about areas of being an artist. Is that like actually it like most of your job is going to be writing, is going to be, you're basically going to become an admin person who occasionally
Oh yeah, yeah,
occasionally dances.
yeah,
um
because you're trying to get the jobs, aren't you? So it's like,
yeah.
especially if you go freelancing, you're not thinking company work. And the problem with a lot of like um in terms of educational institutions use my proper voice. My
Did you mean the
my
institution, sir?
institution, yes, absolutely. Which is we're all the schools are training us to be dancers and company dancers, and that's
Yeah.
it, which does not serve us. Especially, it doesn't really matter, especially if, not necessarily like well, definitely contemporary, but like in terms of like other things like I mean, even though like if your course, say you're like in a course that does pretty much everything, so like musical theater as well, at least you kind of have like agent weeks and stuff like that. And even then, we're still trying to like be performers, and it's not really teaching us, okay, so what happens if you don't get into the chorus? What happens if you don't become the company dancer?
Yeah.
What I've had friends who've like been apprentices for like fairly big names, and then now they're like, because if actually I find um sometimes that initial success actually, while I'm happy for them, I feel like sometimes that can be a hindrance, because it's like they've not had to then learn the difficulty. And then those same people I'm talking about who got these jobs are now working in like cafes, and they've not been able to kind of, because they're kind of, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And that's
Keeping
the thing, like,
keeping the
yeah.
momentum up with dance is really difficult. Like,
Mm-hmm.
particularly because after you sort of graduate. So I mean, one of the things, right, is you graduate. If there's so few kind of apprenticeships or company type jobs anyway, like most of you are going to
Mm-hmm.
be freelance,
And
but you
thousands of people
graduate.
go for the exact same thing,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if it, and in the off chance that you do get like a kind of company role, then that means like not only will you be working full time, but you'll have company class every morning, and you'll be like learning from an established like choreographer. And so that will put you on a track to like continue your learning in an like upwards curve. And it's this kind of
It's a
thing where
familiar
like
thing from school.
it's, yeah, it's like the more you work, the better you get. The more you work, the better you get. And like one of the toughest things is those periods when you aren't working, to get like to have that same level of skill and fitness while you're suddenly working like a cafe job for 4 months or 6 months or 12 months or whatever it is. and in those gaps in between. And to keep that level of fitness and you're just keeping your skills not only just maintained but improving is really difficult, you know, which is why
Yeah.
I see why like some of the like world-class dancers, it's almost like a runaway train, because it's like once you can kind of get into that environment, professional environment where you are working and you can afford to be training and continue your training on an ongoing basis, you'll kind of be okay because you'll keep moving up. But if you don't have those structures around you, then it can be very difficult, you know. And freelancers like dancers figure out ways around it, like, you know, many of them like live with dancers or have groups that they regularly train with and exchange ideas, and they train each other, you know, because class is so ridiculously expensive. The irony is that you're a professional dancer and you can't even afford to do dance as a hobby anymore because because the classes themselves are so pricey. But yeah, I
Rent
really
on
appreciate
your
that.
minimum
Like,
wage job, you got to pay that rent, you've got to pay the
yeah,
tax, you got to pay the, and then whatever you have left over goes towards class if you're lucky. Like, and what if you want to be a creator, but
yeah,
you have no like external funding, so you're trying to fund it yourself, and it's like it's it's tough. Like I tried to do the thing of like, okay, well, I can't really afford class anyway, I want to be creative, so I actually started going to class. And I went for me, I was like definitely creative route because I'm definitely not a technical person, and doesn't remove the fact that I can perform or whatever, but it was for me, I was kind of like, okay, this is where my love is. And in term,
yeah.
especially with what we're talking about and like the time you're dedicating to this, especially like if you don't go into company life and it's like, yeah, because you know, when you're college, you're doing 35, 40-hour days, like, well, not days, but like a week of training.
Yeah.
I was like,
It's what
wait,
it
that
feels
doesn't
like.
work. Math.
Feels
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
35-hour day.
Fun fact, I found out I was dyslexic in my final year. I was like, if that's any surprise
Yeah.
indicator to my math. And no, my math's not that bad. That was just morning, just only have my tea kind of brain.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it indicates that you're doing like that 35-hour to 40-week training or whatever it is, to literally that being cut in like more than half, to be honest, especially if you're going to be working afterwards. And like for a lot of artists, actors and everything, you know, hospitality jobs, there's kind of like 0-hour contract things which, you know, are fun, and and you know, the very kind of stereotypical things, and then trying to like so I remember being the most healthiest I had ever been to the most unhealthiest I've ever been very quick, like, because you're not keeping up with that thing, and it's like you can't afford to, like, and technically struggled to do that as well, even with student loans during college time. That was difficult itself, but there's little things you could like apply for and stuff like that to help you out. But still though,
Let me take a quick pause and introduce you properly to the audience.
yeah, maybe
We'll keep all of this in, so it's like no big deal. But
yeah.
hello, lovely dance people, and welcome to David's Dance Podcast. I'm here with a choreographer I met maybe 3 years ago at a Merge Festival in London, and it was a fantastic week. As we got to, you know, be familiar, and I got to get sort of familiar with his work. He's currently working on a new project called Sanctuary, based around mental health, you know, an issue which is very important to us. And so we're excited to dig into his process today and get to know a little bit more. So welcome to the podcast, David West.
Yes, the Davids, we grow, we continue.
The Davids, yeah,
we are beloved. Yes, the Davids. Yeah, so excited, like you say, with like, for instance, the project you just mentioned, Sanctuary, which we're currently working on. That's and kind of my work in general has been focused on things to do with mental health or the psyche, and it's kind of come from a place of, especially like being very trying to be as super aware as possible about everything I do, in terms of like just showing practice in and out of the studio. And it's like um slowly and growing in that respect, because I think that's just important rather than just making work about it. It's like the process of like even before you go into studio, in the studio, after the studio, so the process. And I've been slowly trying to develop what that is. I can grow and get that better. And because I mean, first and foremost, just as a disclaimer, I am not I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist, even though I'm interested in psychology. But it's that thing of like, what can I do with my mindset and something I'm really passionate about, and then over time I want to try and maybe get qualified in these things. I've been looking actually at stuff like university, like doing a master's of science, which is like and it's like a psychology course that has mental health aspects, but it can go to arts and science and stuff like that. So I'm hopefully going to do that at some point. When that's going to happen, who knows? Because time management. That's the freelancer's life. And so it's like
I've been learning taking the time with it. Mental health is a really difficult subject to unpack on stage and in an artistic process, and to do it in a way which feels like kind of authentic. Like I've seen it done really badly. I won't mention any names, but I have watched one show which was sort of, they said it was about mental health, but then the whole thing was kind of like a like all the mental health cliches of like a 1950s hospital and padded walls and people like screaming and tearing up the walls and like doing kind of crazy things. And it was kind of like it's like, this is just full of like kind of cliches you've seen in like a horror film. It like didn't really ring true. It felt like all the movement was kind of like, or the characters was like, the character was the mental health rather than they were a person with mental health. And I think that's always like an important distinction. Is like, hey, these characters are actually real people who have mental health issues. They aren't solely defined by schizophrenia or by bipolar disorder. And that's one of the issues I usually have whenever I see mental health depicted in film or in dance or in any artistic context, is when like that mental health thing defines the character entirely, and there's nothing else interesting about them beyond like their mental health issues. It's not like, oh, they're bipolar and they're super into basketball. There's like no acknowledgement of like any other kind of interests or personality quirks or anything like that. So I think a lot of it, it comes back to just handling the subject, not so much with care as much as just humanity, I think, and just like having the empathy of like, oh, these are actually like real characters. And or it might not be a character approach to it, but I think that's part of it.
I mean, I think there's a total agree, and it also kind of pursues the narrative that it's something to be scared of.
Right.
From what you're telling me, instantly I think people are like, ooh, wow, that's a lot. Like, and it's like, even though mental health can be a lot, it's kind of that thing of like, I really try and going back to what I was saying about before and during and after the process and things I've been developing over time. Again, I think it is that thing people kind of just, let's do a thing with like mental health, because I've seen kind of similar things to shows like you, like just kind of jumping into it rather than giving it time it needs. And I think especially if my company's basically all about this, like, and I also think, what's the rush as well, like I think that's just our culture of quick things now fast. And it's like, well, especially when it's like certain, because if not mental health, I've seen other kinds of works which is like makes a certain issue become slapstick, which really isn't and should have been given a lot more care. Like I'm talking about like work on this thing for a year. you know, do your research. And I don't go into issues that I'm not aware of. You know, I think that's another big thing that I see a lot of. Like how much work and how much to this experience are you been aware of and like partaken in. So one of even the first projects I do was in school settings and like and about growing up and self-reflection, which I think most of us can, you know, relate to. And it's something I could definitely like relate to with a lot of experiences, and how I like conduct my life and like, and also like, and talking a bit before the introductions and talking about collaboration, is that I really include my dancers in that, and I think it's you know, I hear how they feel about doing this thing. It's like and even these days we're like doing a lot more with like safe space stuff. So like we set our boundaries before we've even got into the studio. Like
That's
and
great.
talking about things like to just even as simply as like, and it's also kind of this, because there's a we had an internal discussion recently for this recent project Century, and one of the things was like, oh yeah, I don't really want to kind of like fake it when I get in, like in terms of like, especially like I, you know, in terms of if these things come around about certain moments that might stir me as a performer, like emotionally or whatever, it's this thing of I don't want to fake it. And it's even when we create these boundaries, okay, we have the session before and we've stated, and there's the safety net there, but let's like do what we got to do when we get into the studio, so it just feel like a normal process rather than it feels like it's kind of, to use the lack of word, theatrical. And
Right.
the thing is like it's all theater and it's all set up, you know, like overly like pressing like, you know, it's kind of are you okay, okay all the time, because that could be a like dude, like that's a bit much, you need to calm down.
Yeah.
Even though that's my natural thing to be like, I want to make sure people are good, and it's actually which actually could be detrimental in a way, and also force like fake things to come out because they feel like they need to perform, whereas it's a, instead of it being very organic and very like honest or authentic, and that's something we try to do as well. um um and also just stating like, you know, things like literally no means no, as simple as that, like as well. And there's moments, you know, recently where it's like, look, can I take 10 minutes to do this for myself? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I don't really feel like doing that. Great, we won't do it. That's it. You know,
Yeah.
and really just because you're building, and it's the case as well if you work with new dancers, it's like building that trust between each other is too important. And to know that they can ask that. There's still sometimes that
Because also
apprehension,
there's
especially
a
with you.
lot of environments, especially when you're starting out, where you're not sure. Like when I first started out, there was I came into some processes, and the choreographer was great. They were really nice and a very understanding person. But like, you know, you're so fearful when you get your first job. You don't want to ruffle like any feathers or
Oh,
anything
100%.
like that. And you know, that I was so apprehensive to say things that made me uncomfortable or I didn't really like, or things like that, where I was like, I could really do with like 5 minutes just to like kind of get back into the room and into my head. But like I never said those things because it was like, well, this is my first job. I'm not gonna like mess it up by like, you know, yeah, ruffling any feathers or anything like that.
Yeah.
Which I
No,
think was
that's tough.
so one of those things where like our industry is so competitive and we want it so much. But I think being really explicit about it, like you are, and saying, hey, you know what, you know, guys, if you do need to like take 5 minutes, if you do need something specific for yourself, because it's giving the practical examples that's more important. Like you can say, hey guys, this is a safe space, but it's like, what does that actually really mean? And when you
Yeah.
can give those practical examples of like, hey, if you guys don't want to do something, tell me you don't want to do something. And it's like having those practical things in place that actually make it a safe space, like, and actually make it a great working environment. It's only when you actually have like specific processes that sort of make that work that
Mhm.
Otherwise you can say the word safe space, but it doesn't make it a better working environment.
Yeah, no, I think that's a thing to jump off for me to jump off in terms of like, just because you said it doesn't mean it's safe space. I think you have to like, and there was moments that I've had where it's kind of like, okay, we've talked about these things, and I can imagine that, and especially in moments I've been into, even if it's nothing to do with mental health and with just it's working things, like just general like how they say work and how they conduct themselves in space. And it's like, do you though? It's kind of like as a performer thing, I can feel like that sometimes as well as a choreographer, and that relationship with performers, they kind of like, it is that thing of like, I do have to prove it to them. They can't just take my word for it, because we're trying to build
Right.
trust here. um some people are like super trustworthy, which is a great beautiful energy to have. I was very much like that when I was younger. um but
Before the world got to me.
before big the big boy world came for me, and I discovered things as an adult and just went, ooh, ow. My
Yeah.
trust has been smashed to pieces. Which I think is just the part, like that's like, the ever challenge of human suffering, right? Like even narrative input and like how certain things come across, in terms of um saying, oh, I am, I can see them, like, yeah, I don't, yeah, I'm like, look, I know like in other processes choreographers can be a bit rare. I am not that choreographer. You could be straight up with me, and just reinforcing that and telling them, because I think it's just hearing you say it gives them
Yeah.
that reassurance. Because if you kind of um you can say it for like, you can talk about, yes, we do this, but then you've got to show you that you actually do in studio, without it being over excessive, like I said, like, oh, you okay, and it's kind of like generating that kind of false narrative, and they feel like they're just making to like make for the sake of the work, and for
Mhm.
you, and trying to you know help the choreographer. I'm like, no, 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 no. Oh, look, we need to make the thing, and that's why you hear as dancers, and like this is the job, right? But you're still people, and there's we did during the pandemic, we did it only for like 6 months, but we did a gathering of we did like a peer support group thing,
Mhm.
which is like one of the ways I'm like, okay, so we can't really do much dancing at the moment in lockdown, but it's like, what are the one of the things I can do without, and to be supportive, but at the same time, I'm not trying to be a therapist. It's literally a bunch of people getting together and expressing how they feel,
Mhm.
and things that are like either they're overjoyed about or really bummed out about, and sort of things. And there's a phrase that came out of it, because we did talk about choreographer and performer relationships quite a lot. That seemed to be quite a theme at the time. And kind of this thing we said, what was kind of coined out some of these things is the people before the project. And I really have now taken that into telling people like, this is your work too.
Mhm.
I might have final says on things, but don't think I've not thought about you, especially like when you're in an environment where like I've got my writer who's a male, and like I identify as a male as well, and then you got female identify people in the identifying people in the space.
Mhm.
It's kind of thing of like having that, and it really all comes down to, in a way, for me, I'm very over communicative to the point I probably get very annoying for people, but at least things are super crystal clear.
Right.
And then people know where they are, and they know how they feel, and to allow her to be able to feel like she could say that to me, the choreographer, the
Mhm.
person who is paying her to do this job, um that she feels she can do so without any sort of retribution, like, it's like, what, you're calling me a creep or something, or because I'm a guy, or it's like, no, it's like removing that entirely. It's not about that, and it's literally just about like kind of go, it kind of a little bit is it does, like, and being able to go, you know what, you're right. And it's this, and what is this, unless it was that kind of, that was the narrative at that point, maybe that was the thing, but it wasn't. I was like, no, you make a really good point. And it's like, and she was like, oh, right, cool. And like the thing is, like, she was so afraid just to say something like that. And I think it's this that, going back to what you're saying about that first time getting like first jobs and stuff, and like going to new processes, you kind of scared of like what's okay not to say and what's, and I'm saying like you can say it all, like because, and not feel retribution, even if I let something I'm not happy with or disagree with, or it's that thing of like, okay, it's out in the air, let's talk about it, rather than there's this kind of scary mist in the background, like, you know, we don't know if it's okay to say, and it's about those things of being like, and obviously it wasn't like one of those situations, but it's kind of like, because it's in a place that you can be in a very supportive environment. So if those moments of disagreement and stuff do happen, or there's like tensions, that we can work it out together, and it doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be, and it's just about, which is the main thing of communication. The number one rule is to listen to each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, that's kind of a little bit of insight in terms of just how we do it, and then you know, we do a check-in with each other afterwards as well, as to add to the after thing. So it's like, are you good? It's like, you know, I actually agree with you on that, and you know, and you make a good point, so thank you for saying that, and feel like, and I also saying this, and I did say this, like, you know, thank you for saying, and always feel like you can do so. I hope you know me well enough that you can do that.
Yeah.
You know, I am in the position of authority, and to, in a way, like, it's understanding. Yes, I've said this a couple of times now, but yes, I am the choreographer, but I'm still David. I'm still like someone that you can communicate to, because it's especially like everything that happens in the space and what happens with the project is kind of thinking about it like, I am the number one person position wise, right? If you want to go into hierarchical structures and stuff like this, but it's like, but I'm responsible for everything. It's all on me, and I need to make sure that I am in a place that I try and be on a level with people, and try to make them feel comfortable enough that they can, because you don't know if they've got the great idea that's going to make you successful. Like, you've got to give people the space to say those things. And, you know, when I'm stuck as a choreographer, and especially but the thing is, actually, this is really good. I'm sorry, I'm like going off on the thing. I get really passionate about these things. And it's this thing as well, like, as I've been thinking, is like, yes, I'm the choreographer, but I'm also in the piece, and also need to produce a lot of things. I need to get these admin things done. And sometimes you do need, it's a lot of hats, exactly. And it's like, and by empowering your dancers to be kind of, it's funny because I always in the past, like, I try this, but I kind of slightly given up on this, because I always try and put, in terms of who choreographed the David, like EQ dance go, but they always put my name in the end. I'm just like, well, I don't feel like I can take full responsibility for that, like, unless I created every single freaking movement in it. You know, and that really happens. And it is collaborative, the whole thing, because, you know, there would be no piece without dancers, and I think a lot of choreographers forget about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of centering it, like having the company so that you can center the authorship of the work within kind of like a collective idea or collective identity or brand or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the piece is not autobiography. It's a piece of viewpoints and different POVs. Like, it cannot just be solely my one-dimensional process. It has to be omni.
David West.
Yes, that's welcome to
in a world.
What is it? It's like
David West world.
Jeez, Westworld, David Westworld.
Yeah. Let's
we get copyrighted for that.
Yeah, exactly. And sued. Let's talk movement a little bit. Tell me a little bit about, you know, you have this idea around like mental health, or it's sanctuary. It's day one. You get into the studio. Like, what do you do? What's your initial process for, like, you're in the studio and you start to lay out some ideas? You know, what's your kind of approach? You know, do you like to go straight into movement? Are you kind of like a notebook guy? Do you have scenes that you like to flesh out? You know, or Do you
Mm,
like to go out and play with ideas? Sort of, what's your
mhm,
kind of like, the starter gun goes off day one,
mm.
you're in the studio. Where's your natural inclination to go to?
See, that's an interesting one for me because I base it on the individuals I'm working with.
Hmm.
Um, because not everything I do is going to work for the people in the room.
Hmm.
And it is very, um, I know where I might go if it was just me. But we're talking about if it's just me, like I'm an improv guy. Like I
Cool.
really do a lot of that. I don't pre-make stuff before I get in the studio. I'm all about trying to create things as organically as possible, even if they are then set later. Like it has to come from like a truly organic places. And a lot of things in some of my works are like just set improvisations. There's not like some of it's structure, some of it's set improv, some of it's just
Hmm.
pure improv. Um, and it depends
Does
what
that
the
also relate to you as a dancer? Because like for me, for instance,
Mhm.
I drive a lot of my choreography. The only way I really know how to choreograph is to like improvise, and then I keep improvising and refining that improvisation until it becomes like a set choreography. But
Mm.
I can't do step A, step B, step C, step D. Like I kind of just have to do
Yeah.
it, and slowly step A and step D emerge and set. And then like I start to fill in the blanks. But that's
Mm.
really because although I can do choreography at my core, I'm a freestyle dancer. And
Yeah.
like I always will be. And so that's where I'm most comfortable. And so I choreograph in that way. Is that true
Yeah,
for you as a dancer, or is it
yeah,
some
I
other
think so. I
reason?
think that I don't know because of you and me. Like I first started in street dance styles. So I don't know if that's and I know
Yeah, it's very similar.
you're a
So
b-boy
like,
as well, right?
yeah,
It's like I think that's just ingrained into our mentality
yeah.
because it's a freestyle art like art form. That be breaking, that be pretty much, let's be honest, most street dance stars because that's where they start from. They start from a very like um just from a feeling, right? So it's and then they slowly condense into these moves that were very familiar and associated with different styles, right? So it's very pretty much the same process. It sounds like that's exactly what we do in the studio when we go in. So it's like not far from the tree kind of thing. And I definitely I'm very similar. I think I'm just super improv-y. And especially when I'm working with, say if I'm going to choreograph, which I've done a couple of times with London Studio Centre, where I graduated from. And I do their kind of these alumni platforms where you go and choreograph from the students of that year.
Oh, cool.
And what I do sometimes, I'm just literally like, right, follow me, and we just go and we just make it as we go organically in the studio at that time, whatever the vibe is, and right, cool, right, what was that? And we try and refine it together. Like I like to work quite fast because I don't want to, for me it's trying to get away, like I really try to stay organic as possible for as long as I can. um a lot of stuff I obviously do have to set, but sometimes it's kind of okay, can it be set improv? And I feel like kind of like if I was over setting, I would never do these kind of, it really depends what the piece is. I find this really I just find this a difficult question to answer. But it's a good question. And it's but again, it depends who's in the room as
Right.
well for me. It's they might be super terrified at improv and the piece is about confidence unless you went from like a narrative of like growing confidence.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, it really depends.
Let's take Sanctuary because that's your most recent
Yeah, let's
example.
take
How
sanctuary.
did how did you kind of jump into the studio and start creating movement for this? And
Yeah.
was that movement? Did you have strong ideas going into it? Because sometimes I get in the studio and I have really specific images or movements or feelings that I know
Mm,
I'm going to kind of flesh out. And then other
yeah.
times I go in and it's kind of like
Mm.
no idea what's going to come out. Sort
I
of.
think, well, we do go in obviously with the topic and kind of we did with because the way we've done sanctuary is very modular. So we've done like we
Okay.
did like a week with me, just me.
Mhm.
It's like made up of like solos and duets. It's like an anthology of these.
Hmm.
So it's
I like
me.
that as a way of thinking about choreography. Is like an
Mhm.
anthology. I find, yeah,
Yeah,
literary examples can be really helpful actually. But yeah, an anthology is like a good way of thinking of it.
yeah.
These
It's
little like
just like
short stories
a
almost.
series of, and it is just made up of individual stories. And what we did recently, as of, I believe it was even last week. Jeez, I think, I don't know, time construct. And it's like and when we've all come together at this point, and we've worked together in the studio, and now we're at this point where we're trying to develop set and props. So we plan to do like a production week next year,
Mhm.
and hopefully that then leads into like shows and stuff. So um but like in terms of going to the studio, I think it's, we do have ideas of what kind of each of our individual things, because we've had a conversation with each individual person, or the duet that we've got going on,
Mhm.
but the talking to them as individuals as well, rather, even if it's duet, like with them as individuals, like what they want to do, um and how they would approach it, and like in their concept of what they feel sanctuary is. And again, that's kind of, rather than just from a movement perspective, we're taking it from a psychological, mental perspective, a spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
And this is very reflective in the work, because we've broken up the work into, my solo is more about um, physical attachments to like objects and places.
Mhm.
Um, and why we call them sanctuaries, not, it's more the emotional attachment, the memories we attach onto that place or the object.
Hmm.
um and one of those things, I use a childhood toy. And then there's another aspect, which is about the, say, these sanctuaries here, the sanctuary here. um and we go into that, and we also talk about spiritual sanctuary, and we do this in the way of um sanctuary within other people, with others, in terms of connecting with people. And it's kind of these individual stories, and eventually comes to which we've been trying to develop as well, which is the community aspect, and how all these stories live within amongst each other. Um and when we've gone into these modular things, and we've worked on these different things, we didn't do it all in one go. And obviously modularly helps with budget spending, and for me, forever the producer. And it's and yeah, I guess we know what we want to start broad, and it's the question of how we go like this, and like morph and condense, and find out really.
Right.
Yeah, we always start very broad and work our way in, as conceptually. Movement wise, again,
Does
we
that mean you like you flesh out a lot of ideas and then you start to hone in on what is the core idea? Or
yeah, the core
yeah.
idea for the individual people or persons.
Yeah.
um so because sanctuary is a very broad subject, like the
Yeah.
concept of it is very broad. And to find sanctuary has different meanings, especially like it means different things to different, especially people like if we want to go into like social political, is like refugees as well, they're trying to find sanctuary, trying to run away from political persecution, or even genocide, or all these other things, to go kind of that more kind of deeper root. But obviously, again, we're not exploring that, because we are not in a position to do that. We shouldn't do. um, and even if it's not to say that we wouldn't, but again, like everything we do, it's a long process. And for me, all my works, not just sanctuary, but like with other works, they will exist for time, and they can always come back, and how they come back is based on like we've been slowly having the way, and like doing the research, like creating the like right environments for people to have these conversations and talk to the right people. Because again, we can do that, and there doesn't need to be a rush about it.
Mhm.
And I think there's always this rush. um to go back into the moving conversation, we go from like, we literally go with like, again, with prompts we give to dancers, and even prompts I give to myself, we go into improv. So we just give like stimulus, like I think it's worth talking directly of how my solo operated. So in terms of, we went with literally like the daily grind. Funnily enough, because I'm very kind of like always working away. I'm always and thinking back to like working like in the bar all the time and just being absolutely shattered and doing that, and then I'm not really getting to the art, and then I need to pay the rent, and I need to do all these sort of things. I literally went with this concept of like imagining like joints and everywhere in the neck and the hips and everything, in terms of.
So is it like you're working from like a word prompt like grind, and then you're
Yeah, we
like,
do a lot
what would
of.
that be like if that was like a kind of physical movement
Oh
texture,
yeah, and how do you expand that? So even like
right?
how you like push, even like over body parts, how do you like grind another body part against another, and kind of like it's very open. Obviously I know it, like where the reference originally comes from. It's like a daily
Right.
grind. We're going kind of literal and see what that does. And I use a lot of repetition actually. um and I use it a lot to show journey, struggle, and the fact, the pure repetition of, well, the daily grind. It made sense. And how then over time, like truly you do get exhausted if you were to do the same thing, like the same movement phrase over and over again. You're going to get exhausted eventually, right? And we bring up the tempo, and it's this and it's quite a fair representation, I think, of like you working like back-to-back days. You're going to be absolutely knackered, and then you want to do all your hard stuff. And on top of that, and you have to use that outside of hours, and you're like just not getting sleep, and it's like and you get pretty exhausted and frustrated. And this particular element that this prompt was used to create this kind of, and this is a set improv phrase, it's not superly structured, like and it's something that just gets generally felt, and me as I'm doing it have to try and connect a way that it slowly builds, without um yeah. And it's really trying to get into the mentality of going back to that working in the bars, and really just getting that frustration of like, I really don't want to be doing this the rest of my life, like going to like a very kind of mental place, like a personal
So,
place.
so also then taking that original prompt and then using it as like emotional information for like how you
Oh
can
yeah.
like how you can start to like emotionally, how you can perform it, how you can be in it almost as like a state. So I quite like that. Like, so you have this like initial word prompt, and then you're kind of like, what is that like as like when I turn that into like a physical movement? What is that like as like a situation to be in, even, you
Mhm.
know, what is that like as like kind of an emotional state?
Yeah.
Um,
Then
yeah, to
we
start to
back
unpack
together.
it choreographically.
Mhm. What's like pushing the narrative, what's pushing the movement, the emotional side of it as well.
Hmm.
Music choices, like, so I think recently as we're starting to finalize a lot of stuff, especially because we have to look at like free alternatives, because licensing and all that for music.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's that thing of like, which is easier to do if we were to make our own music and stuff like that, but then again, try and hire a lot of musicians is expensive at a very small company.
Yeah.
But luckily my writer, like, he's a visual effects and the editor, so he plays things, so he might make some stuff, and then we'll look into like other kind of free alternatives and stuff like that. But it's add to kind of producer side, because I mention some of these things sometimes as we're going on, because I think it's, I'm very passionate about like talking about these little things, because I don't think they get talked about, like little things like music, making sure that, could I then remove the music again, it's this dissecting process, will it still have the same push, or have I been relying on music quite a lot?
Hmm.
And I think by
Do
yeah,
you
that's
mean
where the
like
music choice
if
becomes
we
a big
take the
thing.
music away, is the feeling still captured in the movement?
Yeah, because it's like, especially if you're having to, at the moment we're just using it kind of any tracks, and it's like, okay, what if the music changed, or what if, like a real life performer thing, something goes wrong with the audio? Can you still do that without the driving force of the music? Because we can get trapped by music, even though it's such a beautiful thing and it brings so much out of us. And as creators and then improvisers, we use a lot of music to try and bring out, especially emotive content, right? from someone who's over like relied on a lot of music, sometimes you can get music can box you in
Right.
some ways, because it's like you're playing to music and the layers there, whereas and you might not explore certain routes. Like if I was to then just choose a different track and do the same, it might not work initially, but it's actually there's something in this particular music that is then bringing a sort of energy which actually fits the narrative a lot better.
Mm.
And then you're trying to then unlearn stuff. So I think it's really important to try and like maybe find initial inspiration with music. That's fine, but I think it's really important to try and then remove yourself and try and see what the movement is for itself. Because yeah, I think it's like when things happen in our lives, it's not always music playing, you know.
Yeah.
We feel things even when there's no music, like if a situation happens, you know,
Mm.
or like just general soundscape, even like, you know, of life and just hearing the birds and the trees. Is that a good or bad thing? It's like it again, it's very contextual. I'm talking in very general terms.
Mm.
And
I
very
think
different
it's helpful
processes.
as a
Yeah.
choreographer to have those moments when you're like, you know, if each of those media, whether it's like lighting, music, costume, all those other things, how they exist together, but then how they also exist apart, you know, particularly for movement, because that is the kind of the core and the center of what we do as choreographers, you know, you and sometimes particularly when things get bigger budget, you don't want to sort of hide it in window dressing of the
Mm.
music or these other things, you know. So it can be really helpful just to see just how you, like you say, how the movement sits by itself, you know. How does, without the movement, just having bodies on stage, and if we flick through the lighting, you know, what do I feel when I see that, you know, without seeing the lighting,
Mm.
with the movement? Does it just work with the lighting and the body? Is that telling me a story? You know, similar with the music,
Yeah.
if I just play the music through, it's like, well, is that telling me enough information? You know, it can be kind of like a quick helpful, almost like a quick litmus test for like, you know, do each of these elements kind of stand on their own, and then what happens when, what new information is added when we bring them together, you know, because like almost like other feelings emerge when two things are brought together, like music and movement, that don't exist when those two things are by themselves, you know. Something is created in aggregate. But yeah, I think from a process point of view, that's really great advice, to just see how these things sit by themselves.
Yeah. I like how you brought up lighting. That's something that's like, because we usually get to that process, especially like in the early stages. And what we're hoping to do with like this application writing is to have like a week of production. Like we're working with lights before. Usually,
Oh,
sometimes for
awesome.
platforms, you show up and go into lights, right? And then you kind of learn what it looks like on the day. You have an idea, but then you see it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You might not know fully what you have access to, or you're very limited, literally on the day sometimes. Like, you know, when you're doing the platform and you're doing your tech. And it becomes a lot more like with lighting, it feels like definitely for me as when I perform, it feels a lot more real. And you know, light does really help kind of cement things, and like being in this, you're creating this world on stage, you know,
Yeah.
with mood and lighting. So yeah, I think lighting's like something we forget about a lot, because I think it's for, yeah, as we don't really always get to be in a space where we have access to lighting and we can develop our lighting ahead of time, you know.
Yeah, particularly because it's like it's such an expensive element, and
Oh,
like requires all
crazy.
the equipment. So, you know,
Yeah,
if
100%.
you don't have access to those institutions or that level of funding, it's, yeah, you don't necessarily have access to that creatively as a
Hire
choreographer when you're kind of
right, unless you
coming
know how
up.
to do it.
Oh, awesome. That's sick.
I mean, that's part of the application. We're gonna probably hire someone to be a technician, and we're just
Yep.
gonna like, because the work so far is like an hour 15. So
Wow.
yeah, so
You
it's
guys have been
production.
busy.
It's oh yeah. So it's still in development, because there's a lot of things that can't really we couldn't really pursue without set, because there's certain elements. At the moment we've been using this tent
Mhm.
which is not like necessarily going to be the final product, but it's this thing of like, okay, this is just like to resemble something in the meantime. But how do you do that? And also, especially when we do hope this work to not just be an indoor work as well. We hope to like develop it into outdoor stuff as well, to play to like that, also that um element, the sanctuary of nature, and also actually the lack of sanctuary as well, if you want to go into the perspective of like homelessness as well. Even though it's like you're outside, it's also very exposing, very
Yeah.
vulnerable place to be. And I do hope to work like reach out to, one of the things I've been really wanting to do is reach out to charities such as like shelter and stuff, and how we can develop kind of awareness things
That's a
with
great
that.
idea.
It's very hard to get to the outdoor circuit. It's very hard. You can only do so much in an indoor studio to develop for outdoors. But in its current stage, we're fairly happy with it. And excited to go into this next stage of lighting production and stuff. So
I'm aware also we're, approaching the hour. I want to be
yeah.
respectful of your time. Where can people find out more about Sanctuary? Do you have any
Mm-hmm.
performances coming up where people can check it out?
At the moment, no. We're most active on Instagram, so you probably want to see any sort of updates mostly on there. Um, and yeah, as I say, we're talking to a few London venues. We just got to send a bunch of stuff to them. All that stuff that happens behind the scene, like making that promotional material to send
Mm-hmm.
out to venues, those promotional packs and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
And trying to do organized stuff in Scotland. Scotland is a little bit harder to try and do, especially as we said at the beginning of the podcast, of like me coming back and trying to redevelop those relationships that from years ago, or starting new ones of new organizations that popped up since I spent my time in London. Yeah, keep an eye out for Sanctuary stuff for that. And then we also do classes on the next Thursday, last month before Christmas. And then we'll be doing like an announcement as well, like how workshops are going to change slightly into next year. So do keep aware of that. We do classes, we do pro class.
Okay, awesome. We'll put all the information in the description or link below. So
yes,
do check it out, people. Follow David and to find out more about his work. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in, and thank you, David, for joining us on the podcast this week.
thank you for having me.